That being said, let me first thank the UN Association and the National Union of University Students for arranging today's meeting. Very happy to be here, very glad to be here. In fact, I'm over the moon since this morning, just 2 days after the Security Council open debate on youth, peace and security. Finland just announced that you will be the first country to have a national action plan on 2250, and I'm hoping that this momentum will continue to grow and other countries will start following your footsteps to take this agenda seriously. And also I'm very glad to see some familiar faces in the audience, in fact quite related to the topic. With Demo Finland, I managed a project in my home country, Sri Lanka, called Sri Lanka Youth for Democracy with Anu and Rika. We brought together young politicians from 16 different political parties in Sri Lanka and discussed post-conflict reconciliation and potential political solutions for our ethnic conflict and related issues in my country. So very happy to be amongst those friends and colleagues here today. As introduced, my name is Jayathma and I am the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. My main role is to bring the United Nations closer to young people and bring young people closer to the UN. In doing so, I don't say I do, but I try to mainstream youth concerns, issues, priorities, and most importantly, solutions in the 4 pillars of the work that the UN does on sustainable development, peace and security, human rights, and humanitarian action. In doing so, mobilizing young people as active citizens and ensuring their contribution not just to the development and peace and security of their countries, but largely to the civic and political contributions that they make into their societies is also a core aspect in all this work. So today I say that we are 1.8 billion strong. We are, as it said many times, the largest generation in history, and with that comes incredible amount of opportunities, but also some challenges. This morning I was speaking to a group of young students from a high school in the suburbs of Helsinki, and I told them that it's the best of the times to be a young person, because we are the largest generation, we have access to technology and information, we are the most connected generation ever, but it's also the worst of the times to be a young person, because we have a large amount of man-made conflicts happening right now in the world, natural disasters, adversities of climate change, 71 million plus young people unemployed, 500 million living in conflict-affected areas, 400 million young people do not have access to quality health care. Some 100 million young people worldwide are unable to read and write. So it's really the tale of the two cities. It's the best of the times and the worst of the times. And one of the other staggering facts that I found out when I was doing my research was that the voter turnout for 18 to 25-year-old is low and continues to be lower than the other age groups. And globally, only 2% of the members of parliament are under the age of 30. I think this directly relates to the topic that we want to discuss today. How can young people be a resource for democracy? So the first point I would like to touch upon is the issue of youth participation in political processes at large. Why is the voter turnout among young people is the lowest? Is it because young people are ignorant and lazy? Or is it because they don't care or are indifferent to contribute to the democratic processes? The typical answer you would receive, ideally from an older politician, is yes. But I think the majority of us in this room would disagree with that easy answer. And when we survey the political landscape from the perspective of young people, it is easy to understand how a young person might become apathetic or just give up. Indeed, a poll in Australia conducted last year found that just 49% of 18 to 29-year-olds express a preference for democracy. A quarter even said it doesn't matter what kind of government they have. Such expressions should not be taken lightly. They are indicative of a larger and arguably growing disease that will produce social complications if we fail to address it. However, such statements should also not be taken to be indicative of young people not caring, because young people do care a lot. We have seen this with starting from the Arab Spring to youth-led movements such as the women's marches worldwide, the March for Our Lives, and as Jonas said, the own movement that you started here in Finland to advocate for a Security Council resolution on youth peace and security when nobody thought that it was possible. So young people are capable of taking action through both formal and informal channels when barred from the more traditional formal routes. And the modern democracy is in dire need of rejuvenation. Rejuvenating democracy is about ensuring the needs and rights of young people are fully met. This is only possible when we put in place the conditions and opportunities necessary for young people's meaningful participation in political processes. And I say meaningful with a lot of weight, because I think over the years we've managed to do a lot of advocacy and create awareness of making the case for young people to be in the room or be sitting around the table. But that participation most often has become just a box-ticking exercise. You know, at the end of the day, oh, we had young people in the room, oh, so much energy. I was at the Commonwealth Youth Forum last week in London, and every single speaker who spoke about was like, oh, youth forums are so great, there's so much energy. Whenever we feel bored in the real forum, we come to the youth forum for, you know, to get that energy. But I really find that offensive, because it's like looking at young people as a group of animals, or like, you know, you would go to a zoo and look at and get some kind of an entertainment. Whereas what we need is to be recognized as the true experts we are. I mean, all of you are experts in your own field, and we need to contribute with that expertise, not to be some exotic decoration or an addition to a process that happens, you know, beyond our control. So that is also what I think we tried to do with Demo Finland in Sri Lanka. I talk about my personal experience here, because I come from a country that was affected by a 30-year-long armed conflict. And the real issue in our political context is that we cannot, the different ethnic groups or political groups that are based on ethnic voter bases cannot agree on a common solution for a power sharing modality in my country. But when we talk about youth participation, either in politics or reconciliation, we always limit it to organizing a cultural event of young people from the north and south, organizing a sports festival with young Tamil students and young Sinhalese students, or a schools exchange program, which are great. I think these are great. Cultural understanding each other's values, communities, what they represent, what their needs are great. And sports, entertainment, these provide very good entry points to those discussions. But we believed that young people should also talk about those serious issues, like, do we need a federal system for Sri Lanka? Does our constitution need to be a secular one? Is this the kind of legal and constitutional framework that we as young people want to live in? And you know, it's usually we were not invited to these serious conversations about finding the durable solutions for politics and peace in my country. And what we tried to do through the program that Demo Finland funded most generously was to bring young politicians together to talk about the serious issues. At one point, the word federal was actually considered a bad word in our country. If you said the word federal, you were considered to be someone doing something illegal or like not acceptable. So you used to call it the F word. It was quite ironic, but at the end of our dialogues, we were actually able to talk about these issues very openly among ourselves and the young politicians. But of course, this is just one example, and it's easier said than done. And there is no quick fix solution to young people's political participation. We need to be practical, we need to be realistic, but we also need to be visionary. Rejuvenating democracy is not about making accommodations for or on behalf of youth. It's about harnessing the potential of young people's energy, enthusiasm, creativity, and most importantly, the skills, the unique skills that young people possess when it comes to networking, communicating, and connecting with each other. One thing is clear, that young people can be effective agents of change, and it is high time that we tap into that potential. So what can we do to tap into the potential of young people as a resource of democracy? I have a few suggestions. First, we need to build the evidence-based quality research to understand the root causes of low youth participation in politics and ways on how to engage them in dialogue. This will help us put in place youthful political cultures and eventually contribute to addressing the issues of low voter turnout. I had a meeting with some of the young parliamentarians of the Finnish parliament just before I got here, and I was very impressed to learn, perhaps you haven't reached 100% there yet, but in Finland, you have a number of youth leaders who are also the leaders of your political parties, which is a very rare case when it comes to the rest of the world. Most of the time, we as young people find our entrance to the formal political structures through political parties, and most of the political parties' structures are not youth-friendly, and we don't have a lot of young people in the leading positions or leadership positions of political party structures and leadership. So finding those entry points and invisible barriers that are there for young people to participate in formal political processes is, I think, equally important. Second, we need to change the business as usual when we do politics. In fact, in the era of digital revolution, the only thing that remained analog is politics. We live in a world of applications and smartphones, and if one can handle his or her financial transactions online, why can't that same concept to be applied when it comes to exercising your rights in elections or political processes? The use of carefully designed, secure electronic means enabling young people to vote must be expanded. Nearly half of the internet users in the world are under the age of 25. This is how young people communicate, and this is what speaks to us. So to use social media to engage young people in dialogue should not even stand as a question for politicians, and it should be a given. And use what information and communication technology has to offer to make the election processes more youthful. I was earlier referring to an example with the young parliamentarians that I came across in Argentina. In Buenos Aires, in the city council, a group of young people came together and they were discussing about how their elected members of city council behave differently before and after elections. So how they do not really live up to the promises that they make before elections once they get elected to the actual city council. And most of the way that they vote or express their ideas are actually very different to what their constituency believes and responds to. So they came up with an app that allows people in the constituency to vote for the laws that are being debated in the city council. So say there's a bill for transportation, say, I'll just give a very bland example, privatization of transportation in Buenos Aires city area. Yes or no? actual citizens could vote yes or no to that bill or propose amendments to that bill. So the policymakers could actually see what his constituency actually believes in, or how they would vote if they were actually sitting in the city council seats. And that put an immense amount of pressure on the city councillors to be responsive to what their constituency is saying, and at the end of the day to be accountable. So this youth group took all these technological applications and they actually met the policymakers face to face to present them with their findings, and then they found out that there was a lot of resistance. They didn't want to acknowledge it, they didn't want to go with it. So they came back, they were having these kind of town hall meetings and discussions with the citizens, and people actually encouraged this youth group to run for the next election. So this group, I'm sorry, I don't remember their name, but I can find it out and share it with you. So this group actually ran for the next city council elections. They got 25% of the Buenos Aires city vote. And they are now represented in the Buenos Aires City Council, and the way that they vote, they behave in the City Council is the way that their constituency asks them to directly respond. So this is a very unique example of how technology was used to consult people, to be directly participating in policies and decisions that affect their lives, but not forgetting that this might not be possible in everywhere in the world, because not everyone has equal access to technology or instruments or connectivity. Last but not least, we need to maintain and further expand the best practices that engage young people in political processes from their early ages. When I say this, I'm referring to the youth advocacy groups, youth wings of political parties, children and youth parliaments, and youth councils. These institutions cultivate political cultures and open up access to institutional dialogue with national governments and legislative bodies. All these suggestions are being implemented in some shape or another in different countries, and it is avenues like this which offer the opportunity to share best practices on what works when we talk about rejuvenating democracies. Allow me to move to the second point I want to raise, which is the importance of young political leaders or young political role models. My office works closely with the Global Forum of Young Parliamentarians that brings together members of the parliaments, but their definition of young is, of course, under the age of 45. Because if you consider under the age of 30, you wouldn't find many parliamentarians to constitute a global forum. So we go with 45 in this case. We advocate for removing barriers facing young people from running for elected positions through a campaign called Not Too Young to Run. 73% IPU, the Interparliamentary Union's member countries, I think that constitutes about 173 countries, and 73% of them have legal barriers that restrict young people from running for public office. So you can vote when you're 18 or in some cases 21, but you can't run for elections unless you're 40 years or 45 years old. And this is the case in many countries, in 73% of IPU's member countries. There is a youth group called YAGA in Nigeria. They came up with this campaign, and then of course Ahmad Al-Indawi, my predecessor, scaled this campaign up to a global movement, and now we are continuing it. So in Nigeria, Nigeria is one of the countries with the largest youth population in the world. They have about 180 million young people in Nigeria alone. The minimum age to run for public office in Nigeria is 40 years. So through large amount of advocacy and political lobbying, they managed to bring that age down to 35, which I think is still very high. But the process is still going on, and not only in Nigeria, but in many parts of the world. Now we advocate and work with member states and civil society to push for these legal barriers to be taken away so that more young people can run for office and actually participate in politics. As I said, I met some young parliamentarians here in Helsinki, but I've also had the privilege to meet with young parliamentarians from different parts of the world, from Somalia to Gambia to the Dominican Republic, and really the issues and the concerns and the challenges, I would say, mostly young parliamentarians face in most parts of the world are very similar. And I believe it's even worse when it comes to lower levels of representation, when it comes to local governments or provincial councils or city council, it becomes even difficult. And these young politicians have overcome stereotypes, stigma, and barriers that I listed earlier, and are proudly representing their constituencies in parliaments. It was very interesting to hear from the young Finnish parliamentarians today that there was a question that what is the age group of their voter base, their voters, and I was actually expecting them to say that majority of young people vote for young politicians, but for most of them, it wasn't just young people, but their vote base was much wider because they actually spoke into issues that were not just relevant to young people, but relevant to our society at large. Young politicians that I've met all across the world are smart, motivated, and dedicated, but trust me when I say that there are thousands of young people just like them who cannot get elected to national parliaments or make direct impact once they are elected. Because, as I said, in some countries, in order to run for office, you have to be as old as 45, which is higher than the average age of life expectancy in some countries in Africa and the developing world. In some countries, in most countries, I would say they need endorsement or blessing of established political parties in order to be able to run for elections. And even when they meet their country's age requirement, young people lack networks and financial backing to establish themselves for running a campaign in the traditional way. We have to wait for years to be treated as equals with their more experienced peers, or even get a proper office space to meet with the constituencies. Young women, needless to say, face double discrimination, both because of their gender and because of their age. Are we doing justice to the world we have given to the average parliamentarians? As I said at the beginning, half of the world's population is under the age of 30, but only 2% of the global parliamentarians are under the age of 30, and the average age of a parliamentarian is 55 years across the world. So that is why we need to rejuvenate the democracies and give more voice to young people. As also part of our Not Too Young to Run campaign, we advocate for lowering the voting age to 16 to reflect the age structure in many countries. I know that you've been having this discussion in Finland as well, and I'm very excited to hear from you what your thoughts are and where that process stands. That's pretty much what I wanted to say, but there's also 2 points that came to my mind after I came and sat here. The first one, of course, is when we think about rejuvenating democracy or thinking about how young people can be a resource for democracy. I think there are 2 other key issues that we need to focus on. The first one is the emergence of the new powers. So for too long, I think we've been thinking about civil society and governments and private sector as kind of the big powers in our society and to manage in order to kind of enter into these difficult discussions. But with the emergence and the development of the technology sector, I think there are new powers that are being developed. We talk extensively about social media, about mass networks that are peer coordinated and mobilized, networks such as, for an example, Airbnb, who dominates the entire hotel industry without even owning 1 square foot of land, and networks like Uber, who dominates the transportation industry without owning even 1 car. So where do we place this kind of new powers that are coming through peer coordinated, mass mobilized powers? Now I see countries like Denmark and a few others appointing permanent representatives not just to the UN and EU but to the Silicon Valley as well. So do we have to think of new power structures when it comes to engaging with these tech giants as well. And the second point is came to my mind when I saw this publication on the desk, Youth on the Move. We have a large number of young people on the move, both as refugees and migrants. And when you talk about democracy, an important part of democracy for me is the issue of citizenship and how people express their democratic right, maybe by way of voting or participating in civic and political processes where they live. But in a context where young people or anyone lives in a refugee camp for 12 to 25 years, being the average, what does engaging in a democracy look like for a young refugee? For a young migrant. So I think if we are serious about rejuvenating democracy or reimagining what democracy looks like and the role of young people in it, I think these are also some questions that we will have to find answers for. I'm really looking forward to our interactive discussions. Thank you once again for having me here.